Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Adam Shepherd.
And you're listening to the ITPro Podcast.
So, today's been a weird day. It started off hailing when I was coming into the office, and now I am sitting here sweating through my shirt because it feels like 1,000,000 degrees.
I think it's yet a further sign that we're in the middle of the apocalypse, but it's just much slower than we promised previously. I think you get the impression for like apocalyptic, kind of literature or the book of the apocalypse that it's all going to happen very soon together, but turns out it's really quite slow and boring and involves more hail than previously thought.
So, aside from apocalyptic hail, I don't know about you, I've found myself becoming a lot more suspicious of friends and colleagues in the current pandemic climate. Oh my god.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of public transport, as anybody who follows me on Twitter will know. I spend an inordinate amount of time on there, although less than previously, and everybody is looking at each other askance. Yesterday, a woman got on the way into London wearing what looked like vinyl gloves, or like those disposable kind of rustly ones, and a surgical mask. And I was thinking, kind of like, I guess the sensible precautions, but then getting on a bus for an hour and a half and going to central London where you're going to end up going on the tube or whatever is perhaps, if you're that worried, then perhaps you should be not doing that unless you have to. Previously, obviously, people telling each other, to cover, at very least cover their mouths while they're coughing, which
feels like the bare minimum at this point. Yeah,
you should be doing that anyway, but I think in the past everyone would have just maybe glad at you, possibly tutted, but actually you kind of going, excuse me, cover your mouth when you're coughing is not something I've seen before, and I've been on, lots of public transport. So yeah, we're, I guess, becoming slightly more confrontational rather than just passive-aggressive as well.
So, pandemics aside, this week we are not looking at coronavirus for once. We are looking instead at digital transformation, and we'll be joined later on by Solis Digital co-founder Jordan Watson, who has worked on digital transformation projects with the likes of Rolls Royce, the FA and Team GB. Before all that, however, Chancellor Rishi Sunak has delivered the first budget of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's majority government following the December election.
A nice caveat there on which government we're actually talking about.
Which of the many that we've had in the last 18 months or so.
Indeed. I wonder if that's another sign of the apocalypse.
What, a revolving door in Downing Street?
Yes. The budget, perhaps unsurprisingly, was largely focused on COVID-19, extra funds for sick pay, for business interruption loans, also some funding for flood defences, rebuilding, improving, that kind of thing. I imagine that the budget probably looked slightly different when it was originally drafted compared to what was stated yesterday. For the tech industry, though, the biggest news is a $5 billion investment in gigabit broadband for hard-to-reach areas, which is my big old hobby horse. I love a hard-to-reach area getting broadband.
So this is following on from the manifesto pledge that the Conservatives made prior to the election regarding the rollout of full fibre and gigabit broadband for all by 2025.
Yeah, so I'm sure the tech industry will be, kind of happy to hear this. However, there's no word on other manifesto pledges that were made for the tech industry. For example, the cybercrime force, frontline NHS tech, for example. Admittedly, there's time for that if you need to deal with a pandemic first.
Yeah, there are some things which should take priority over things like the creation of a cyber force, good though it would be.
Nevertheless, we are getting a UK ARPA.
We are. So this is part of a big push for research funding. The government is throwing money at R&D and science development and tech development, and is allocating a big chunk of cash for various research projects, including, as you say, the creation of a UK equivalent for ARPA, which is the Advanced Research Projects Agency in the US.
Or rather was. It's the grandfather of DARPA, which still exists.
Yes, which you may know from the cool robots and whatnot that have famously come out of it, things like Boston Dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why they're modelling it on ARPA. ARPA, was the cradle of the internet. So there's that kind of history there. I imagine that it won't be called UK ARPA, though. No. It must have another name.
Well,
it must. Upon its creation, it will be given another name. Surely.
There is no official name for it as yet. But you know what? UK ARPA isn't the worst name in the world. I mean, it'll immediately get shortened to UCARPA.
which sounds like it's something to do with fish.
Yeah, or possibly Brexit. Which,
Yeah. Yeah. Or, but that's like being called, like, I don't know, the Spice Girls of 2020. It's a bit kind of simultaneously dated and a bit not as good as. So hopefully it won't be called UK ARPA.
Yes. Believe it or not, DARPA is actually behind a lot of what we think of as the modern tech landscape. It's research based at DARPA, helped give birth to things like GPS, Siri for one thing, and things like Google Maps, believe it or not.
Yeah.
You can find a list of the 10 coolest inventions that DARPA had a hand in the show notes for this episode.
DARPA aside and back to the budget, it has been, I'd say generally, the responses that I've seen from the industry, whether that is industry bodies, vendors, analysts, has been largely positive, but not entirely positive.
No. So there have been quite a few bonuses and giveaways for businesses, including cuts to business rates, various grants and loans that small businesses in particular will benefit from. But alongside that, the government is also ploughing ahead with its digital services tax, primarily expected to hit US tech companies, social media companies, Google, Facebook, the like, the big five, if you will. But that has sparked concerns of a possible backlash from the US government.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't. The fact, like you said, that it's expected to hit more kind of like US companies hasn't stopped people worrying about the situation in this country. For example, Julian David, the CEO of Tech UK, said that the government's decision to push ahead with the digital services tax, it cuts against the grain, and Tech UK is apparently calling on the government to put a pause on it, kind of maybe chill, rethink things a little bit. I said that rural broadband is my big hobby horse. Greg Mesh, the CEO of City Fibre, perhaps unsurprisingly, is very supportive of this, saying, Britain is a services economy, it runs off the internet, but, everybody needs to be connected to the internet across the country if that's going to work out.
Another big point of contention has been IR35, which the government is ploughing ahead with, which a large number of IT contractors and small businesses have taken issue with, saying that it's going to have a severe negative impact on how they do business. So we'll wait and see as to what the eventual impact of that will be when it comes in a couple of months.
Yeah, despite some wrinkles, it looks like this budget's going to be one that goes down a treat with business. And if the government is able to deliver, then SMBs in particular should be very happy.
And speaking of SMBs, Microsoft has its own SMB-related news this week, but it's not quite so positive, unfortunately.
Yeah, not exactly, is it?
No. So this is the news that Microsoft has accidentally revealed details of a critical flaw in Windows Server Message Block 3 software component. This alert was accidentally released. It was meant to go just to security vendors as part of one of Microsoft's advanced notice programs for the security community, but it actually ended up going out publicly on Patch Tuesday instead, which is not ideal for Microsoft.
Yes, and to add insult to injury, there are no official mitigations or patches that have been released, so
There are workarounds, it should be noted, which Microsoft have confirmed, if not officially endorsed in as many words. You can find, again, details of those in our coverage on the website. But the big problem is that it's a wormable flaw.
Yes, wormable being that once you've got in via an initial infection, you can dig around much like a worm and get into other machines should you wish to.
Yeah, if the thought of a wormable SMB flaw is setting off vague alarm bells for you, that's possibly because you remember the Wannacry ransomware, which also exploited a wormable SMB vulnerability, a vulnerability that was known as Eternal Blue. Now, this isn't to say that this flaw is inevitably going to lead to Wannacry 2.0, if you like, but it is definitely something to keep an eye on, because flaws like this can be really quite serious if not addressed and patched in a good amount of time.
Yeah, and we will leave links to all our coverage, which does, as we say, contain information about some of the workarounds in the footnotes. In lighter news, though, VMware has announced a range of new and updated products, which are mostly focused around Kubernetes operations.
Yeah, the company has launched vSphere 7 along with the first 3 products in its new Tanzu portfolio. That is Tanzu Mission Control, which is based on managing multiple Kubernetes clusters across different environments, including things like public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, on-premise, etc., etc. The Tanzu Application Catalog, which is a catalog of verified, trustworthy open source components. It's essentially a rebadged version of the Bitnami open source catalog, which VMware acquired some time ago. And the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, which is a ubiquitous container runtime combining Kubernetes tooling, container images, lifecycle management tools, and various other bits and pieces in one place to allow enterprises to get up and running with Kubernetes in as short a time as possible.
Yes, so this was all previewed at VMworld 2019, which you attended, in fact.
I did. I was on deck in San Francisco for the previewing of all of this stuff. vSphere 7 was previewed as Project Pacific, and many of the applications which have been launched as the various Tanzu products were also teased ahead of their release. And this is kind of a big focus of VMware for the next couple of years, is going to be really establishing a foothold in the Kubernetes space as a serious player at the enterprise level.
What was your take on it at the time?
Well, my take on it at the time was that it's a very sensible move for VMware. While VMs aren't going away anytime soon, VMs and containers do different things fundamentally and are good at different things. Kubernetes is on the rise, and containers makes a lot of sense as a future platform for enterprise application development and operations, and it makes a lot of sense for VMware to get into this space as early as possible, and building Kubernetes tools into its stack through things like vSphere and things like its Cloud Foundation services is, I suspect, going to encourage a lot of its enterprise customers to start experimenting with Kubernetes now that they know that there is a level of support and tooling built into their existing stacks, essentially.
Yeah, it sounds very much like it's an and, not an or a instead of VMs, and like you say, they play nicely together. It to me makes sense as well from the point of view of adding another string to their bow as a sort of legacy vendor, really. All the Tanzu products, as I understand it, are available immediately, and vSphere 7 should be available May the 1st, if not before.
Yes.
After the break, we'll be talking to Solis Digital's Jordan Watson about the realities of digital transformation. But first, some ads.
Welcome back. Now, digital transformation has become a top priority for a lot of companies, but many organisations, particularly larger ones, are finding that it's easier said than done. Now, Solis Digital has helped major organisations, including the FA, Team GB and Rolls Royce, to grapple with this issue. And co-founder Jordan Watson joins us now to talk about how they've made that happen. Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and Solis's work.
So I suppose my background isn't a typical background when it comes to technology. Growing up, I was brought into the professional sports world. So previously, as a youngster, I was an apprentice with Manchester United from like 8 to 14, and then joined Preston North End, and some professional football was my whole career. And then in terms of getting in the world of tech, I got offered a contract in the States, and I had to take a gap year. There's only so much running and going to the gym you can do in a gap year, apparently. So it was time to get a job, and then being a young 18-year-old, getting your first job, just to try and fill your days up, I came across the small company who was using Excel at the time. Now, not only were they using Excel, they were also using calculators on their desks. And they were taking the calculator and putting the result back into Excel. So I got the bug from technology just by quickly reformatting some Excel documents for them, showing them that the world of technology isn't, that there are things out there other than using an abacus and a whiteboard. So then I soon realised that actually I had some skills with me, whether that was personal skills when it comes to professionalism, hard working, the nature of running in a high performing environment, and I just had some basic skills as well in terms of things that you would use from GCSEs, A levels, things like that. And that's my start of my career into tech. I did almost an atypical approach from that point onwards, went and honed my skill being junior developers, moved up and do sales roles, and then worked in large consultancies, run tech teams, and then most recently we launched Solis Digital. So as a company, we are empowering small and medium-sized businesses to have the technology available to them that the larger enterprises have. And inversely, we are taking a small to medium-sized business approach to these enterprise organizations to actually allow digital transformation to be a possibility to them.
So we've mentioned some of the projects that you've worked on. You've worked with companies like the FA, like Team GB, like Rolls Royce. I was wondering if you could give us just a quick overview of what those kind of projects have entailed.
Sure. So in terms of the bigger name brands that you mentioned there, I would first qualify digital transformation. There is a lot of hype and buzz around digital transformation, and it's not always big bang, multi-year, multi-million pound oil tanker turning projects. There are some real tangible benefits that we can highlight a specific problem, whether that's in a work group of a few people to a few hundred, where some small change could make some real impact on their working environments. So on the smaller scales, these big organizations are running like thousands of small businesses, and that's the space that we typically sit in. So we get to almost be parachuted into a small team inside a large organization where we can evaluate their problem and try and iterate over a digital solution to give them some tangible benefits. It could be as simple as people are still using macro or Excel documents to run a business critical process, to people are stuck in what we define as a work rut, which is that people are working really, really hard and nobody's questioning their approach or their effort, but actually the needle isn't moving anywhere quickly for them. So we go in and try and address that need of organizations, whether that's people, individuals, teams, departments, or whole businesses are stuck in a rut in terms of working hard but getting nowhere fast.
So Solis focuses on custom app development, but what makes custom apps more powerful for digital transformation than just off-the-shelf tools?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very valid question. I think from a consultancy approach, I wouldn't necessarily put one weight on one or the other. It depends on the problem. It depends on the use case. There are a lot of what we define as single-use applications on the market or appliance apps. They're designed to do one job, and they're designed to do that very, very well. And we almost tell customers to envisage those appliance apps like your coffee machine or your microwave. They take a critical part of your day, and they can make a huge impact if they were taken away, but they shouldn't be running whole business critical processes from it. So by all means, if we evaluate a process and look, you're struggling to see statuses or move things through a process, then of course Trello or LeanKit or other software providers like that is a fantastic choice. It will solve the problem quickly. But you quickly get to the point where that's solved the initial problem and you've got your first round of efficiency gains, but now your inefficiency is actually re-caught up with your efficiency gains. And now you're in a world where you're not just plugging together one app, you're not plugging Slack into Trello, into Salesforce, you now got a suite of 10 products. And now the world is still getting harder. You're back inside that rut again. You've got an efficiency, you've grown, you've got efficient, but you've almost dug yourself back into a different hole. And that's where, for us, custom applications sit. It's the void between you've got your first round of efficiency by single-use applications, and now you're in a world where you're struggling to make those work perfectly for your business. And that's the world of the custom application that we sit in.
So in terms of those kind of inefficiencies that you're trying to solve, what are the ones that you keep seeing crop up kind of time and time again?
The difficulty with the 21st century is you've got the big companies, you've got Google, Amazon, Microsoft telling the world that AI and machine learning is the future, and isn't this a wonderful world that we all live in? We almost define that as the promise of technology. That's the promise that people think technology has, that we're all going to wake up and everybody's going to walk around with iPads and the world's going to be transformed tomorrow. The reality that we see on the ground is something vastly different. It's that people are using the tools that they have access to. So what you would typically think of organizations are struggling with, they are struggling with that, whether that's paper-based processes, that's production lines still relying on whiteboards to update stock information. It's Excel documents, again, running business-critical processes. Like whether you're the smallest organization in the world to one of the biggest, you've got the same challenges that any organization has. So I wish I could tell you that the world has changed because the big companies say that that's where we're heading. That is where we're heading. The reality is what if you think about your own workday, what you're currently struggling with, every organization is struggling with. Influx of Excel documents, a plethora of appliance apps that you're struggling to move data between all of the time, not knowing where the information is, checking have you got the same version of the document, whose number is correct, I've got a different number, which version of the document is. It's the same old problems that we walk into day in, day out. So
you've worked with very big companies, established companies, very small, very small.
Yeah, very small.
Yeah. How much of an impact do factors like size, the sector, the age of the company have on how difficult or easy it is for them to do a digital transformation project?
My honest opinion is it's as hard as if you're a startup as if you are a well-established multinational company, but it's just as hard for different reasons. Digital transformation in the world that we sit in is usually automating operational process. If you're a startup of 5 people, you don't have an operational process yet. You're still working that out, and you have to go through that journey of working out what your process should be. And having a specific custom-built application, to an extent, can almost inhibit your ability to make those decisions to work out what works and what doesn't work for you. So if you're a startup which is in a sector which is rapidly changing, and your software isn't giving you a USP, that isn't the fundamental differentiator of your business, then it is back to that appliance app world. See what works, find out what your process is, so you can get to the point where you actually need operational process and governance in place. If you go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, again, these are big oil tankers of companies. They are multinationals whose process has either been ingrained in 40,000+ people. Change is hard. Nobody likes change, and usually for big transformation projects, the sweet spot is the companies in between the two. It's the companies that want to go through that first round of growth and now need operational process. Or the teams or divisions within the large organizations who want the control over their own efficiency. And that's what the space that sits perfectly, in our opinion, for digital transformation.
Within larger businesses, you said that they're almost sort of several smaller businesses clumped together. And if you've done a digital transformation project with one kind of business unit, if you like, do you ever see, a desire or like a spread of kind of, oh, well, that worked quite well for those guys. Should we do it as well?
There's a snowball effect, is what we define it as. It's the once you've shone the light on the possibility, you can't put that light back in the box for the teams around them. So yes, there is an element of the bigger companies. The end of one team's process is usually the start of another team's. So what you're usually doing is you're working with a team in which you start the process with them and you get to the end, and that's fundamentally changed the way they work. And then, but you're still issuing an Excel document or a CSV document that gets sent to somebody else so they pick up the process. So there is an element of you could almost chase that change around the business and move from one team to the other and follow that, almost the data and the process around. The difficulty is that when you're at a point in larger organizations where you're then talking about real process and governance change, that's the point where the process and governance is in place, because these are huge organizations that need that control. And then you're into a world of we need to go through the right checkpoints, governance and control, which isn't always catered into digital transformation. It's sometimes positioned as everything's super quick and easy and change can happen rapidly. It can. The caveat is, but if that software is fundamentally underpinning a critical process, there is still the same level of governance and control and change management which is required inside these bigger organisations.
And once you get to the level of governance, presumably all the lawyers turn up as well and kind of go, wait.
But again, it's more towards that these processes have worked. These companies wouldn't be that big without these processes fundamentally working. What our challenge is to say it could be working better. And there is a challenge of, but it is working. And it's our job to, as I said before, to shine a light on, just because it's working doesn't mean that it's as efficient as it can be. And it's finding the balance between the business and the possibility, and finding a middle ground of, just because we see that it's possible or it can be possible doesn't necessarily mean the business should be making the decision to implement that change. And there's always a friction between what technically we see as a possibility and the level of change and the level of buy-in that a company is willing to accept in terms of a project.
So walk us through some of the favourite projects that you've been involved with customers. What have been the most rewarding ones for you to work on?
Oh, there are so many. The beauty of what we do as consultancies is the team define themselves as being on work experience 24/7. So the world of my dining out stories could last me a lifetime based on the stories I have. Again, we work from everybody to Equine Horse Insurance. A company around the corner from us thought we specialised in horse insurance. I was like, no, we're actually a tech consultancy. So on one end of the spectrum, we've got horse insurance. To the other end of the spectrum, we've got capital investment, big manufacturing plants. I think the most rewarding use case that we've got is with Team GB. Team GB had a specific problem in which, in the lead up to the Olympics, again you wouldn't know unless you were in that space, but they've got about 2,500 people which go to the Olympics, and each person receives a unique allocation of kit. So 2,500 people need to go and get sized up for kit and be measured and make sure that they're actually leaving with what is arguably the most important clothing they will receive in their professional lives. And again, previously, all of that was very efficiently, I must say, run on paper and Excel-based documents. And now it's run on 77 iPads up at Birmingham NEC, and the whole process is digitized. So there's no paper now based in that process. The rewarding side of it is that Team GB rely on volunteers to help run the event. The event runs for 6 weeks before the Olympics. So it's a big event. And we get to go on site, we get to work, we get to see the volunteers and the athletes use the software. And as a rewarding side of it, we get to the Olympics, somebody stood on a podium, we know that we've played, if not a small part, in giving them at least the right kit at the right time efficiently to get them there. So the technology that we use in order to facilitate the projects with Team GB, the 77 iPads, the efficiency, we use Claris FileMaker. And as part of using Claris FileMaker, the Team GB have seen the potential of the digital transformation. So the next step is us looking at how we can then impact almost game time facilities in order to get them efficiency in terms of running the actual Olympic setup on site. Part of that is, again, there's problems that are probably in the news, but people don't really understand the impact, is when you turn up to the Olympics, each Olympic team is given almost a hotel to look after in terms of it's 1,000 rooms, maybe a couple of hundred rooms that nobody's ever lived in before. And in essence, the talented staff at the British Olympic Association take responsibility of that building, whether that's plumbing, whether lights not working, whether somebody hasn't got a pillow, or general facilities they have to look after. So in essence, we're looking to evaluate, is there anything we can provide in terms of simple tracking, managing concierge service, somebody's issued an issue with plumbing, how can we get a plumbing in, to simple things like, where do we find the nearest restaurant that has been verified that we're okay to use and eat there? What is the emergency contact numbers? What is the schedule? What activities have we got on? Again, as the British Olympic Association are a small organisation of less than 100 people who are managing almost for a 6-week period the most watched sporting event in the world, and they've got to get 2,000 plus people out there and manage them for that event as well. So again, they're a small organisation that has some ambitions to be as efficient off the field as they are on the field as well. So that's what we're looking to do in the run-up to these Olympics and the next Olympics going forward. On the flip side, the most rewarding thing for us is being on journeys with companies. The beauty of us working with small and medium-sized businesses is businesses always start small, and we get to start that journey with them. So the other rewarding side of the work and the challenges that we see is again, because small to medium-sized businesses, you always start small, and usually once the companies have gone through that first round of growth, we're usually stepping in at that point. So we get to be almost a strategic partner through the life cycle of that company. So there's nothing more rewarding than seeing a company being able to double, triple in size and revenue, but not have the same handcuffs to the table as they did when they were a small organisation. So it's the rewarding side is us being able to go back into a company, back into a team who was previously struggling, who are now flourishing in a world where they're actually able to do more with less. And again, that's almost more rewarding with a small organisation, because you know they're actively working to employ more people, to provide more input into the economy, to their local community. They're providing jobs locally as well. So that the smaller businesses we see a direct impact to at a personal level. The bigger organisations, we do see an impact, but it doesn't necessarily have that personal approach.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you once again, Jordan, for joining us. You can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on Twitter at ITPro, as well as on Facebook and LinkedIn, or sign up to the ITPro newsletter for a daily dose of IT news.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode. And please also remember to leave us a rating and a review if you have time.
You can get in touch with us by emailing podcast@itpro.co.uk.
And we'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Bye. The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.